Thank you for coming to our pitch this morning for LEMM Technologies. My name is Marcus Kramer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer.
And my name is Rush Bartlett. I'm the Director of Corporate Strategy. Now, LEMM Technologies is trying to solve one of the greatest needs in healthcare, and that is the need for a non-invasive blood glucose measurement technique for diabetics, specifically type 2 diabetics, because type 1 diabetics use continuous blood glucose monitors which have leads that have to be injected, so it's still painful, but they have to be changed only every 3 to 4 days. This isn't really practical for a type 2 diabetic because they're very expensive and because there's significant barriers to entry into this market. Type 2 diabetics are about 21 million people in the United States and can range over a wide variety of age and demographic groups, but it's traditionally known as late-stage onset diabetes. The process of checking your blood glucose level with a traditional meter is first you sterilize your hand, which is rarely ever done. Then you lance your finger, well, this is the painful part where the needle comes out. And then once you have your finger with that hole in it, you have to squeeze it just a little bit to get that blood to pool. Then you take this strip and stick it in your meter, and then take that meter with the strip connected and touch it to the portion of your finger with the blood to get the accurate reading. Now, in this market, they've operated on a razor blade model for decades. And what I mean by this is they hand out all these really sexy, cool-looking, very easy-to-use blood glucose meters for free, and then get you to buy $1,500 worth of test strips every year to go in those, just like a razor and razor blade. Besides being very high costs, it's obvious that this process is painful, very inconvenient, could take up to 5 minutes for elderly patients. There's problems with sterility, which could lead to infection, and it's multi-step, which means that all of these together lead to a very low patient compliance with testing. So you're supposed to test 6, 7, 8 times a day for a type 2 diabetic before and after every meal, but typically it's 2 to 3 times a day if you're lucky, which leads to diabetic foot ulcers and premature deaths in a lot of diabetics, including my grandfather. There's been 2 Valiant efforts and many others to solve this problem in the diabetic space. The most notable of which is GlucoWatch, because GlucoWatch is the only device to ever receive FDA approval for a non-invasive measurement technique. What they would do is hit a small electrical impulse across the skin to suck glucose out and then measure it. Sounds great, but although they were approved, they were recalled from the market shortly thereafter because they were getting 2nd and 3rd degree burns from this electrical leads on some of the patients. Census Medical is another company and perhaps the most advanced company in infrared technology. They spent a better part of a decade or more and $100 million discovering one thing. It is impossible to measure blood glucose accurately across the skin. It's doable if you're using a clear container, like a glass or a plastic cuvette, that's not going to interfere with that signal. But if you're going across the skin, the collagen and the other materials in the skin interact with that signal and make it impossible to use a laser to measure that way. So as a result, the state of the field right now is using kind of these flow cell technologies. This is an invention by Kisley Kunjan. He's one of the advisory board members to the company. Cascade Metrics, his company, is focusing on electrochemical techniques, but he's always had a soft spot for IR, so occasionally they publish on this. This device ports liquid blood out of your vein through a flow cell and then back into your body, so you can get continuous real-time measurements across a clear surface with infrared light. The problem here is if you're going to go through the process of getting an IV PICC line put in to have this thing going, you might as well just have a continuous blood glucose monitor anyway. So there's not really a huge need in for this type of a technology. But it can get you thinking because it's very accurate. And so because it's very accurate, it seems like a good way to go if you can find a place in the body that is a transparent window into the bloodstream. And so when we saw this window, we thought, is there an opportunity or a place in the body that we could use?
And so what we did was we said, what's the common measurement site? Where does everyone look to measure blood glucose? And it's in the pad of the finger. And so we looked at this common measurement site. And what we said was, is there somewhere here where we could create a window into the body, where we could look for blood glucose, where we could measure blood glucose non-invasively? And And what we found was others have already discovered that window, and that's the nail. But everyone had the same problem. They tried to go down from the top of the nail out the bottom of the finger. And when you do this, you're going through the skin. And the skin blocks primary measurement of blood glucose. And so we looked at that problem. We said, is there a way to do it and go through the nail and pass through it without going through the skin? And we found that indeed, yes, there is a way to go through the nail without going through the skin. So the nail has a slight curvature in it. And by going across that curvature, we are able to detect blood glucose non-invasively. And this is the basis of our technology at LEMM Technologies. We are currently completing our benchtop studies and our proof of concept studies at NC State University. And we're moving to our prototype development phase, to our concept design shown here on the right, which is called SettleSense. In our proof of concept studies, we were able to show that you can measure blood glucose through the nail, and the nail produces almost no mitigation of that signal. And so you can measure blood glucose without any problems through the nail from a solution. Now, we did extensive prior art searches in the literature, in the patent field, and we found that everyone else who has tried this before has run into basically three main problems: high noise, weak signal, and measurement lag time. Now, the noise and the signal are caused by the skin, and the lag time is caused by other measurement sites. So, for example, others have tried the eye. And when you measure glucose from the eye, that part of the body, that compartment, actually the glucose lags behind the actual blood glucose. And so if you're a diabetic, you want to know at that moment what your blood glucose is, not in an hour what your blood glucose was, because you need to know whether or not you need to take your insulin shot. But from this, we also discovered one other thing. The measurement of blood glucose, that patent for the use of IR was issued 30 years ago and has since expired. And all of the new patents are on the orientation of use and on the compartment or the body part that you're measuring from. And so when we filed our patent, we took this key. And our patent is on the use of spectroscopy laterally across the nail to measure dissolved blood analytes. And what this means is we have both our orientation and the compartment, or under the nail, patented and protected for us. But what's most important out of this is not university technology. This is not someone else's invention. This is our invention, owned by our company and operated on by us. We don't have a licensing agreement. We don't need a licensing agreement. And no one else has ownership or ability to own this technology other than us. As part of this prior searching, what we found was that our device is going to be classified as a Class II medical device and require pre-market approval. Now, this isn't going to require long, extensive clinical trials. This is going to be requiring a relatively short, simple clinical trial, which will involve a few patients over a few years. But what's important about this is our patient population. Diabetics consist of 1 out of every 20 people in this country, which means we have a massive patient population to draw from. And the study itself only requires about 12 to 24 hours of continuous testing, and then the patient can go home. We're just showing that this test is safe, efficient, and accurate. And so that doesn't take very long when you're doing continuous measurements over a short period of time. And the patient population is so extensive, we'll be able to quickly finish our trials. Now, as everyone knows, blood diagnostic market worldwide is massive, $16.5 billion. What we're targeting is the largest part of that $16.5 billion market, which consists of $7.5 billion revenue a year. Of that, the U.S. market is $2.3 billion a year. Massive, massive market. Now, there are a lot of major players in this market. We've got Johnson & Johnson, we've got Roche, we've got Abbott, we've got Bayer, but we don't really care what they did, how they did it, where they did it, or why they did it. And that's based on their fundamental measurement technique, which is an invasive measurement technique. And when you're using an invasive measurement technique, our technique is better because it's non-invasive. And so, moving into our plan of action.
Now, because this is such a differentiated and disruptive technology, our objective is not to just go to market and focus on the marketing and the development. We're focusing exclusively on the development of the product. Once we get the product developed and ready to market, we feel as though we are a strong acquisition partner or strategic alliance partner for several of these larger companies because they have so much to lose in this space. They've done time and time again different deals in this area for disruptive technologies, ranging from $500 million over to several billion dollars in some cases. Anonymous, which was acquired by J&J, is actually a component of the failed GlucoWatch technology. So even though the technology failed, and yes, Anonymous had some other technology with that, they were still able to generate $500 million from that because J&J wanted to make sure that they had a complete lock on their value proposition and their landscape. Also, they provide no-shop payments for exploratory rights to the technology when they're evaluating a company for a deal such as this, which provides additional capital between $500,000 and up for us to continue to innovate around this technology. And as soon as we get to human testable, commercial reduced prototypes, we will be seeking no-shop payments to continue to go through FDA. Our financials right now are based on us growing as a going concern and securing capital either from venture, angel, or from a strategic partnership. Obviously, this is a risky technology because it's in the medical space, so our discount rate we've chosen is 75%. But after only 4 years, we will be able to be through our clinical trials, through our design iteration, through our human factored engineered approach, and with selling to less than 1% of the overall diabetic market, we're able to generate $168 million in revenue by the principal fact that our margins will be insanely high. The actual component cost of the materials of our device will be less than $5, and there's devices on the market, such as a pulse oximeter, that use a very similar technology. It's just a different wavelength of light and a different detector. Pulse oximeter technology, this one we bought for about 20 bucks at Walgreens. And the hospital can get disposable units without a circuit board for about 60 cents. So cost per unit is not a big deal for us. What we're doing as far as unit sale price is charging $1,500. And the reason we're doing that is because obviously over time the price is not going to go up. So we're charging the basic price point of what it costs a diabetic every year to buy test strips for their product, of the one that you have to prick your finger. We don't want to worry about reimbursement initially because there's a lot of people that have fear of needle pricks and would love to get away from this. And we're targeting that 1% of the population initially, and then using that market surveillance data to then go in and have a very compelling case for market reimbursement codes for insurance companies on their formularies. To reduce the risk of our technology, we've tried to take a 5-phase mitigated risk step-down approach. Phase 1, obviously the most risky in any technology, and because of that, as founders of the company, we've taken the bite off of this ourselves. We spent $7,500 going through risk reduction studies, renting equipment, staying extremely lean, and getting the data that we have today. This data has enabled us to create a very compelling prototype development plan, which will go and reduce this large, bulky benchtop model that we're renting from NC State University down to the first generation SuttleSense prototype. This is a device that will measure a human finger in a box connected up to a laptop computer. Once we have our initial hazards analysis and feasibility reduction data out of this prototype on the particular wavelengths that we want, we're going to move into phase 3, which is commercial prototype development. We'll contract any number of prototyping firms from Battelle Memorial Institute down to Invitech, and there's many of these firms that do commercial development of these products and do human factors engineering around them to make sure that they're easy to use and functional. And it's after this first development phase here, or after this first commercial-ready product is gone through on this phase 3, we will have 1,000 units of products ready to test on 20 individuals. And at the end of phase 3, we will start to seek either strategic partnership agreements or substantial venture capital funding to take us through clinical trials. The clinical trials at phase 4 may not be necessary because we could be acquired by this point, but this will require 400 patients, and as Marcus mentioned, it's only 12 to 24 hours of study, only a couple measurements each hour of only 400 patients of a very large patient population. Once we get the FDA consulting firm underway, They will then submit the PMA approval, and we will launch the product. Now, I've known Marcus for a long time. He's one of my best friends from graduate school. He's got double bachelor's degrees in chemistry and biochemistry, and he will finish his PhD in biomedical engineering actually on Tuesday when he defends for his dissertation thesis. He's done 7 years of biomedical research, and he's one of the most widely published individuals that I know for his age, with 9 peer-reviewed publications and 2 book chapters on analytical chemistry topics. Myself, I've got a bachelor's in chemical engineering from Texas, and over the last 4 years, I've completed both an MBA from Indiana University, and I will complete a PhD in biomedical engineering from Purdue University in the next couple of weeks when I defend my dissertation as well. I've also been a successful entrepreneur previously, taking a company from nothing to the business plan circuit and then going on to raise a Series A of about $1 million on that. And through that company and through other things I've been involved with, including LEMM, I have 17 patent applications, international patents, provisional patents, all going through various stages of prosecution with that intellectual property. We realized by ourselves we might have impressive resumes for a bunch of mid-20-something-year-olds, but compared to the panel up here, it's not really that much. So we need to have some experience behind us, and what we've tried to do with our advisory board is assemble the kind of people that we want to bring on full-time. Dave Giddings has been the interim CEO of one of my other companies, extremely experienced in the industry. He's got 40 years of experience in medical diagnostics, and most notably, he was the chief operating officer and president of Boehringer Mannheim right before its sale to Roche, which then became Roche Diagnostics, or the second largest glucose monitoring company in the world. Ghislain Kunjen, as I mentioned, he's got a soft spot for IR technology to detect blood glucose, and he's been a technical as well as a business advisor to us because he's been around this industry his whole career. Also, we have 3 technical advisors right now, Dr. Alyssa Panich, Albina Visevic, and Simon Lappy, who between them, I think they have 4 PhDs. I think Simon might have 2. And they've started companies, and they're experts in their field, all the way from tissue engineering, biomedical devices, and laser spectroscopy. So if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them now.
To begin with, you don't have a current working prototype, but you do have some concept studies, some proof of concept studies. Yes. Can you take a deeper dive on what those concept studies have developed by way of data to give us a sense, a tangible sense as to whether or not this is more than just a concept, it's something that's going to be feasible, can work?
So we did solution-based studies, both with and without the nail, and we were able to demonstrate that you can both detect and analyze varying concentrations of glucose, and you can do it through the nail. And the most important part about that is the technology itself has been around for 30 years, and it's been explored for 30 years. And other research has been shown time and time and time again in the literature that you can detect glucose from blood clearly, accurately, and predictively. That's not the major hurdle. The major hurdles for our technology is, first, that we can detect glucose through the nail, because you have to determine and show that using our technique that the nail does not strongly interfere. So we determined and showed that through the nail it doesn't strongly interfere. So the next major hurdle is actually developing the prototype to go through the nail in the finger.
Are you seeking capital to prove that in fact you can do that? Or have you already, through your concept studies, because I don't have a sense.
Through our concept studies, what we've done right now is we've taken plastic cuvettes and we've taken human fingernails and sandwiched them around the plastic cuvette. So you have entirely just human fingernail sample and then human fingernail to read through with the laser. We've proven that you can detect through that system. What we have not done is take an actual living person with a finger and stick it in there because we don't have the IRB approvals yet, and we don't have the prototype that is got the correct orientation to fit that finger.
So is it the literature that causes you to believe, essentially, and what you
Yes.
just described currently, that once you build a prototype, that this is going to be effective?
The literature shows clearly that you can measure through the blood. You can measure even in blood in a person. The literature shows clearly the problem is going through skin, because the skin produces a major loss of signal, because your skin is meant to absorb light. If you go outside and you're in the sun and you have UV radiation, your skin protects you from getting cancer. Your skin protects you from the light going in and destroying your cells. Your skin also has large bodies in it, which is meant to deflect this light. And so the problems people have run into is when they go through the skin, they get large noise caused by the scattering and then large amounts of signal loss caused by the absorption. And they've still been able to get very close. They just haven't been able to get a high enough signal-to-noise ratio in order to satisfy FDA requirements for accuracy, which is plus or minus 20 milligrams per deciliter of glucose. Therefore, by having a higher signal-to-noise ratio, which we can achieve going through the nail, we can achieve blood glucose. So that's what leads us to believe that the final step is actually not just achievable, but will be successful. And we just need the funding to get the initial hardware in order to go and develop the prototype for the person.
I don't understand why, if you've done it through a nail in vitro, okay, why can't you go through an animal's nail or in man? I mean, you're not doing anything negative.
No,
right?
that's certainly the direction we're going. The only reason that we haven't yet is because the spec we have is a $100,000 instrument that measures every wavelength under sun, university grade. So now what we need is we've got the exact wavelengths for the LEDs and the detector set that we're going to have. We just need to buy those.
No, why don't you rent the $100,000 machine for a while and just show the thing works?
So I'm going to get a little technical here real quick. The problem with the $100,000 instrument is that when you get research-grade instruments, in order to get beam convergence, what they do is they actually have a concave lens which focuses the beam, the large beam, of multiple wavelengths of light which are divergent into a single focal point that goes through your sample and then diverges out on the other side. In order to do measurement in a human sample, you can't have a converging beam because you can't focus accurately a large beam into a small area as a person's fingernail. So what we need is a non-divergent beam, or basically a laser beam, coming straight across the nail on select wavelengths of light.
So the $100,000 machine won't work?
It doesn't work. You need to have...
Yep.
You need
and then why can't you, how did you go through the nail, though, in the in vitro?
We actually removed human samples, so that was actually my wife's kindness.
No, but what kind of machine did you look at through the nail?
What do you mean?
What machine did you use to come up with that?
We use the convergent beam machine.
We use a convergent beam machine for those measurements, but we had a large sample of nails that we could use to sandwich on either side.
You say that you know that you can measure glucose.
Yes.
So can you measure it within the tolerance range that you need, measure it accurately and repeatedly? It doesn't sound like you've done that yet.
Not from a person, and that's where the problem is. That's the final hurdle. And honestly, if we had accomplished that hurdle, we would have VC funding already. That is the final hurdle that we need to accomplish in order to get VC.
And how much funding do you need to overcome that?
Right now we're seeking $250,000 to get that prototype for the bench top that's connected up to a laptop.
And what wavelength will you use on the LED receiver and transmitter?
4250 is approximately the wavelength. There's actually 3 wavelengths between 4,000 to 5,000 wave numbers of light that you can use to measure it, and we'll primarily be focusing on one of them. Actually, the component cost isn't the large. The reason we need 250, it'll cost about, we estimate 20 to 50 for the prototype, 50 for prosecution of patents,
and then
living expenses, and then other things. I'm planning to take this full-time after I graduate on Tuesday, and so...
I'm still unclear. You'd use the $100,000 machine to go through a nail to look at a jar of glucose, right? Why is that not applicable, that machine, for a human? I just don't get.
Okay, so
how do you know it will work in a human?
Because the lasers are coming in at divergent angles, when you put the finger in there, some of the skin actually impedes the divergent angles of the beam as it comes through to the point. So because it's coming in at all different directions, it doesn't allow you to have the direct line of sight orientation.
With the combining laser.
Yes, and it's such a large
So it's not big
beam.
enough? Is that it?
No, it's throwing too big a signal out and it's not focused enough.
So it's also such a large beam. We're not talking about something that's half a millimeter in width. We're talking about something that's the aperture that initially comes out of it is this large, and it converges to something that's that small, and that small. And so the beam itself is absolutely huge, because what it's meant for is measuring large samples of a standard.
I see.
So is the risk
composition?
Is the risk going? Let's assume we believe you that you can measure glucose through a nail. which I'm not quite sure you've proven that, but let's assume you can. Is the risk in the manufacturing process, the ability to design this device that fits over the finger and can laterally scan a nail?
The risk is not in the manufacturing of that technology because that's already done. Even the orientation of the finger in the system is not too risky. The risk then becomes the accuracy measurements across the nail repeatedly, FDA clinical studies.
So you haven't run those trials yet?
Yeah, and those are phase 3.
The manufacturing and the breakdown of the technology from something large to something small goes to something like this. This uses the same technology. It's an LED and a detector that's already been miniaturized for pulse oximetry. The problem is this works on a different wavelength that can pass through more tissue. So getting more technical, the wavelengths of light we're using can only go through a few millimeters, a millimeter length scale to centimeter length scale of tissue, which is across the curvature of the nail. Something like this can go through 10, 20, 30, 40 centimeters of tissue, which is why it works over the finger. So the miniaturization has been done, the manufacturing has been done. The problem, the major last technical hurdle is showing that the accuracy for FDA approval, plus or minus 20 milligrams per milliliter, through an actual human tissue. That is the final hurdle.
So the ability to position repeatedly, accurately, would seem to be a manufacturing issue.
Yes, it's not a technical issue around the feasibility.
I mean,
of the
my
concept.
fingernail has a different curvature than yours, and it's different diameter than yours, and it's going to go into that little device differently than yours.
But under everyone's fingernail, every single person statistically is about 40 to 50% capillarization. In other words, every person has a large amount of capillary bed underneath their. Underneath everyone's finger is a large capillary bed composed of about 40%, 50% capillary, which means you basically have a blood pool under your finger. And the curvature, so if you think about something like the Earth, and I told you to run 100 million miles, you'd say this is a huge curve on the Earth. But if I told everyone, if I told everyone and said you have to go 10 feet over differing terrains, the 10 feet doesn't change very much. We're not looking at the entire curvature of your nail. We're looking at actually a section of your nail. It's what's called the tangent across your nail. And so the curvature differences between different people isn't actually that large over a smaller distance across that person's nail.
And also one of the things that we see as a tremendous value proposition is that people's fingers are different. And so there's the opportunity to be fitted as you would for a shoe for this device. So you would have a device, your son or daughter wouldn't be able to use your device, so there's not one device per family in that scenario. There's 2 devices, just like there are for disposable test strips.
It would move up and down until you got the proper fit, so to
Yeah,
speak.
that's one of the ideas.
So let me change the subject a little bit. You talked about your initial price is $1,500.
Yep.
And you got to $1,500 not based on cost, but because of the value proposition that's what the disposables
Yes.
are. So from your potential licensees standpoint, they sell $1,500 worth of strips every year.
Yes.
If they were to license your machine, they were going to sell your machine once for $1,500 or whatever price.
Yep.
So is there any recurring revenue in your
There will be recurring revenue because these things will break, they'll get dropped in water. It's the cycle life of a cell phone, which right now is about 18 months. So we see recurring revenue stream every 2 to 3 years, maybe more depending on how much of a quality device you have. So there will be recurring revenue.
And that actually produces a cost saving for the individual, still large profit margins, even larger profit margins, because you're selling something that you can produce for cents on the dime for a very large profit margin, and you're turning around a recurring revenue every few years, and then you're even talking new models, new features for each new model, and the consumer, as has been shown largely by the iPhone and other technology-based industries, is that the consumer wants new products, they want new technology, and they want new advances. Sure. And this is not just a one-hit wonder either. You could turn this around and start looking at other blood chemistries. You could start looking at combinatorial devices that would allow you to detect not just glucose. We're talking iron, potassium, urea, everything under the sun that is tested for heart disease, liver failure, kidney failure. You could have a multi-diverse technology that would allow a doctor to basically give someone something for any ailment and say, here, take this home, look, watch this. If it changes this much, come in.
I would assume that given that you could do, let's say you could use this as a military application in the field, going up and down from a satellite, let's say, and get, measurements that normally would take a real clean environment and a lot of things like that.
That's a great idea. Well, you want to be on, you want to be on our technical team?
Sure. So with that in mind, I think what Peter was about to get to was that the companies you're taking this to, you're basically saying that you're only going to get your revenue stream once rather than annually. Okay, so you could get a lot of pushback from that. Now, given that though, wouldn't this be something that would need calibration every year? I mean, I would think for sure certification calibration could be a $500 hit.
Yeah, 100%. We don't anticipate removing the finger prick entirely from the market, at least in the initial stages, maybe in the final stages once it becomes more accurate, repeatable, accepted by the FDA. But the way the FDA will probably look at a technology like this is they'll want you to use a finger stick to calibrate your device and say, okay, your finger stick says 98, your device says 98 or 96, okay, adjust it to, and then you're ready to go. And that may happen once a week, they may happen once a month,
Okay.
It may happen once a year.
When is stage 3? How many years down the road?
Stage 3 is prototyping, which will be 1.5 years from now, so 18 months. Assuming we were funded today, which obviously there's a lag between venture diligence and funding.
Question. How much capital has been invested so far, and how much equity is given up for the capital you're requesting?
Right now, we are fully, myself and Marcus are the only 2 equity holders in the company, and right now we've put $7,500 of our own money, and that's continually ongoing as we do more proof of concept studies. What we're seeking right now is $250,000 in capital, and if you want to talk valuation on that, I'd be certainly happy to talk valuation with anyone in this room outside of this forum, obviously.
You talk about extending the usage of the device into other chemicals. Have you looked into the possibility of some cloud-based solution in terms of wireless data aggregation and continuous monitoring?
So that's actually a wonderful point to lead into a point I did want to make. What we envision, the end product years down the road once this has been commercialized, would be even something that you could wear. I mean, we're not just talking fingernails. I mean, everybody says, oh, you get it from the finger. You can talk about something that you could wear on your toe that would be wireless, that would just beep your cell phone every 3-4 hours and say, hey, you're healthy, or hey, you need to go to the hospital. We're talking about something that a businessman can wear and not have to take time out of his business meeting to go prick his finger, or a working person doesn't have to take time out of their day to go do it. Military could wear it in the field and then have wireless telemetry in order to say back to the base, hey, this person's not doing very well and needs to come in. Wireless telemetry is the end goal of all technologies.
Would that be something, let's say, that you could plug into a cell phone and then do this? So
Yeah,
you
certainly we could.
In a meeting and not really be.
Yep, certainly that's one avenue. I guess our direction right now is to focus like a laser on making it work in humans, get it validated, get the first product on the market, and then the sky's the limit on what we can do after that.
Is there no animal model you can think of that you could try this on at the current state of the technology?
We could try on canines, because canines' claws, or I guess, or toenails, or whatever they are, have actually blood that fills through there. But that's, again, it's the orientation of the $100,000 instrument that we're
There's no animal that can help get rid of the orientation problem?
There's no animal that would have a large enough nail that would be cost effective for us. The easiest measurement.
No, I'm not interested. You do it on an elephant,
But the canine would certainly, the canine model will work for the nail. It's not the issue of can we test in the animal model. That's certainly definitely something we can do. The problem that we have is with the angle, the instrument that we're using right now that combines beams from different angles, that provides an orientation that doesn't allow us to use that. So it's much more cost effective to just say, hey, we'll build our own custom instrument, and why use the animals in the first place? Just skip straight to humans. It's not going to hurt.
I mean, testing on yourself. I mean, yeah, we could use an animal model. We could design a custom, or we could drag an elephant in, but it would probably break the spectrometer. What we're aiming for is simple, low-cost, lean.
No. But it's important that you indicate that this works at all.
Exactly.
Even if it's $1 million machine, Can you read glucose through a nail?
And that's exactly what we're doing with our $250,000 instrument.
And we can measure.
Thank you.